The hangar at Nellis Air Force Base was a cathedral of steel and ambition, its vast ceiling lost in shadows pierced by the glare of fluorescent lights. The air carried the sharp bite of jet fuel, oil, and sun-baked concrete, a scent that clung to the skin like a second uniform. Rows of F-16s stood silent, their sleek forms gleaming under the Nevada sun that streamed through open bay doors. Mechanics clattered tools, their voices a low hum beneath the distant roar of a taxiing jet. Amid this ordered chaos, Emily Carter stood at the edge of the ready room, her flight suit crisp, her pale blonde hair pulled into a tight bun beneath her cap. At 27, she was a portrait of precision, shoulders squared, posture unyielding, her hazel eyes scanning the room with a quiet intensity that betrayed nothing. She was not supposed to be here. Not according to the smirks of the pilots clustered near the briefing table, their laughter rolling like thunder across the hangar. Not according to General Richard Hayes, whose voice cut through the din as he scanned the pilot roster, his weathered face creasing with amusement. "Which one of you is Echo 5?" he asked, his tone heavy with mockery. The room stilled, heads turning toward Emily. She stepped forward, her boots clicking against the polished floor, her helmet tucked under one arm. "Sir, that is me," she said, her voice steady, clipped, betraying no hint of the heat rising in her chest. Hayes looked her up and down, his gray eyes narrowing. "Echo 5. What is that, your gamer tag?" The room erupted in chuckles, not the warm kind, but the kind that stung, a dismissal wrapped in a punchline. Pilots in their 30s and 40s, men with combat patches and egos as polished as their jets, leaned back in their chairs, arms crossed, grinning. To them, Emily was an anomaly, a girl playing dress-up, the daughter of Colonel Thomas Carter, a name that opened doors but also cast long shadows. She was too young, too composed, too beautiful, her features sharp and delicate in a way that seemed out of place among the grease and grit of the base. She did not flinch. She did not smile. "Call sign assigned during tactical evaluation, sir," she said, her words measured. "Protocol Echo, 5th Group sortie." Hayes scoffed, waving a hand. "Right. Tactical evaluation. Let us hope you are better in the air than you look on paper. Planes do not care about your pedigree." Another laugh, louder this time, rippled through the room. Emily's jaw tightened, but she turned away, her movements deliberate, and walked toward her jet. Each step echoed in her mind, a metronome counting down to the moment she would prove them wrong. The whispers followed her. "She is going to get eaten alive," a junior commander muttered from the tower, his voice low but not low enough. "Colonel's girl or not, she is out of her depth," another officer added, shaking his head. They did not know, could not know, that Emily had not earned her place through academy ranks or public flight hours. Her training had been forged in the deserts of New Mexico, in classified no-fly zones where the horizon blurred into heat mirages. Her father, Colonel Thomas Carter, a legend whose name still graced aviation manuals, had been her teacher. After hours off the books, he had taken her into the sky, threading canyons no pilot dared fly, teaching her to listen to the plane's hum, to feel its pulse. She was his only student, and today, she would be his proof. In the ready room, Emily checked her gear with methodical precision, her fingers moving over zippers, straps, and checklists as if they were extensions of her body. Her call sign, Echo 5, was not chosen, but given, born from a simulator glitch years ago when her cockpit audio failed mid-mission. She had flown blind to sound, relying on visuals and instinct, landing a perfect score. Most called it luck. Others mocked it. The name stuck, soft and game-like, a label that did not fit the steel in her spine. She slid her gloves on, the leather cool against her palms, and ignored the stares of the other pilots. Major James Holt, a senior pilot with a square jaw and a smirk that never faded, caught her eye and made a slicing motion across his throat, a silent prediction of her failure. She met his gaze, held it, then looked away. He was not her enemy, but he was not her ally either. Outside, the tarmac shimmered under the mid-morning sun, the heat rising in waves that distorted the horizon. 6 F-16s lined the strip, their noses pointed skyward, lethal and gleaming. This was no combat mission, not technically, just a joint aerial maneuver exercise simulating enemy engagement, radar lock evasion, and formation under duress. But everyone knew these drills were more than data points. They were for reputation, for whispers in command lounges, for the chance to etch a name into the base's unspoken hierarchy. Today, with Hayes watching, the stakes were higher. Emily climbed into her cockpit, her movements fluid, as if she had done it 1,000 times. She had, though not in official sorties. Simulations, private hangars, and those dawn flights with her father had built her instincts. She slid her helmet on, the visor catching a glint of sunlight, and locked it down. The cockpit was her sanctuary, its dials and screens a language she spoke fluently. She ran her checks, her fingers dancing over switches, her breath steady. Across from her, Holt's jet gleamed, his silhouette visible through the canopy. He did not look at her now. No one did. They were all waiting for her to fail. The command crackled through her comms. Eagle formation, standard 2x3 grid, Echo 5, you are tail end Charlie. Stay tight. Do not break protocol. Copy? Emily's voice was calm, precise. Copy. She exhaled, her hands gripping the stick, and felt the jet's engines rumble to life beneath her. The runway stretched ahead, a ribbon of possibility under a cobalt sky. She was not just flying today. She was rewriting the rules. 10 years earlier, in a New Mexico desert where the stars burned brighter than the sun, Emily had sat in the cockpit of a retired T-38, her father's voice steady in her headset. "The plane speaks, Emily," he had said, his hands guiding hers on the controls. "Listen to it. Feel it. No manual will save you when the sky turns against you." She was 17, her heart racing, her hands trembling as they banked through a canyon, the walls so close she could see the striations in the rock. "Why me?" she had asked once, her voice small. "Because you see what others miss," he had answered. "And because the sky does not care who you are." Now, in the Nevada heat, those words anchored her. The jet's roar filled her ears, and as the formation lifted into the sky, she knew this was her moment to make them see. The sky over Nellis Air Force Base was a vast, unyielding blue, broken only by the glint of 6 F-16s slicing through it like steel arrows. The jets roared in formation, their engines a symphony of raw power that vibrated through Emily Carter's bones. She sat in the cockpit of her F-16 call sign Echo 5, her hands steady on the stick, her eyes scanning the heads-up display with the precision of a predator. The altimeter read 15,000 feet, the air thin and cold, the world below a patchwork of desert and concrete. Her position was tail-end Charlie, the rear of the 2x3 grid, a role that demanded vigilance and invited scrutiny. She was the last line of defense, the one expected to hold the formation's edge. To the pilots ahead, she was also the one they expected to falter. The comms crackled, sharp and authoritative. "Eagle formation. Maintain standard spacing. Radar check. Report in." One by one, the pilots responded, their voices clipped, professional. Major James Holt, leading the second pair, spoke with a drawl that carried an edge of confidence. "Eagle 3, radar clear." The others followed, each call a brick in the wall of protocol. When it was Emily's turn, she kept her tone even, almost mechanical. "Echo 5, radar clear." No one acknowledged her. No one needed to. The silence was louder than words, a reminder that she was still an outsider, her presence a question mark in a world of certainties. For the first 10 minutes, the drill was textbook. The formation banked left, then right, executing clean turns with the precision of a choreographed dance. Emily mirrored their movements, her jet responding to the slightest nudge of her controls, its hum a familiar pulse beneath her. She had logged more simulator hours than most captains had in real flight, and her father's lessons in the New Mexico canyons had honed her instincts to a razor's edge. Yet here, in the sky with 5 men who saw her as a liability, she felt the weight of their doubt like a second gravity. Her gloved fingers tightened on the stick, not from fear but from the need to prove them wrong. Below in the tower, General Richard Hayes stood with arms crossed, his gray eyes fixed on the radar screens. Colonel David Brooks, the base's operations chief, leaned toward him, his voice low. "She is holding formation, but let us see how she handles the real test." Hayes nodded, his lips a thin line. "If she cracks, it will be quick. The sky does not lie." Their words were lost to Emily, but she felt their skepticism as surely as the G-forces pressing against her chest. She adjusted her visor, the world sharpening through the tinted glass, and focused on the horizon. The drill was not just about flying. It was about surviving the gauntlet of their expectations. The first twist came without warning. At 11:12 a.m., a new blip appeared on Emily's radar, high and fast, cutting in from the northwest. The comms erupted. "Bogey inbound, 10 o'clock high!" shouted Captain Ellis, the lead pilot. "Form split now!" The formation broke, jets peeling left and right in a practiced evasive maneuver. Emily's heart kicked, not from panic but from the sudden shift in rhythm. This was the surprise element, a simulated adversary drone with AI-guided lock-on capabilities designed to test their coordination under pressure. She banked hard right, her jet screaming as it followed the others, her eyes flicking between the radar and the sky. The drone was no ordinary target. It moved with unnatural agility, darting through the formation like a wasp, its mock missiles scrambling their electronic countermeasures. "It is not following the script," Holt growled over the comms, his voice tight. "This thing is too fast." Emily's screen flashed a warning. Simulated lock-on. She rolled left, pulling 6 Gs, the force crushing her against the seat, her vision narrowing to a tunnel. The lock broke, but the drone was already repositioning, diving into a lower altitude range and accelerating beyond the predicted parameters. It was chaos, controlled but teetering on the edge of disaster. Emily's mind raced, her father's voice echoing from a decade ago. "The sky is a puzzle, Emily. Find the pattern, or it will find you." She scanned the drone's movements, noting its sharp cuts and unpredictable arcs. It was not random, it was hunting, prioritizing the rear of the formation. Her position. "Echo 5, maintain rear," Ellis barked. "Do not engage solo." She acknowledged with a curt, "Copy," but her instincts screamed otherwise. The drone was baiting them, drawing the formation apart, exposing weaknesses. She eased her throttle, letting the others pull ahead, her jet a shadow at the edge of the grid. In the tower, the mood shifted. Technicians hunched over consoles, their screens a flurry of data. "The drone is off program," a controller muttered, his fingers flying across keys. "It is pushing them too hard." Hayes leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Let it run. If they cannot handle a drone, they will not handle combat." Brooks glanced at him, then back at the screens where Emily's jet was a lone dot trailing the others. "She is breaking formation," he said, his tone a mix of disbelief and disdain. "What is she doing?" Emily was listening, not to the tower, not to the other pilots, but to the plane. Its vibrations, its subtle shifts, told her more than the radar could. She tilted her wings, catching a glimpse of the drone as it looped back, its sensors locking onto Holt's jet. Holt was good, combat tested, with a reputation for precision, but the drone was better, its speed and angles defying human reflexes. "Eagle 3, I am jammed," Holt snapped, his voice cracking. "ECM is down." Emily's pulse quickened. The drill was unraveling, and the real test was not the drone, it was what came next. She adjusted her course, closing the gap between her and Holt. The formation was scattered now, the other pilots struggling to regroup. "Regroup, damn it!" Ellis shouted, but the drone was relentless, its simulated missiles painting Holt's jet with lock-on warnings. Emily's screen flashed again, but she ignored it, her focus on Holt's F-16, now wobbling slightly, its movements less assured. Something was wrong. She squinted through her visor, catching a faint trail of vapor streaming from his wing. Not part of the simulation. Real. "Eagle 3, report status," she said, her voice calm but urgent. Static answered, then Holt's voice, strained. "Red light. Fuel integrity compromised." "I am venting." The words hit like a shockwave. A fuel system failure, mid-air, at 15,000 feet with a rogue drone circling. The tower's voice cut in, sharp and frantic. "Eagle 3, return to base. Echo 5, stay clear. Repeat, stay clear." Emily's jaw clenched. Holt's jet was spiraling, too fast, too steep, its nose dipping toward the desert. If he ejected, the plane would crash, possibly near the civilian perimeter. If he stayed, he might not make it. The formation was too far to assist, the tower too slow to act. She made her choice. "Echo 5, engaging," she said, her tone flat, unyielding. She banked hard left, the G-forces slamming her body, her jet screaming as it dove toward Holt's. The tower erupted. "Echo 5, disengage." "That is an order!" Hayes's voice boomed, but Emily was already committed, her jet slicing through the sky, a lone falcon chasing a falling star. She was not following protocol. She was following instinct, the kind her father had carved into her soul. The drone was still out there, the formation in chaos, and Holt's life hung in the balance. The sky was no longer a drill. It was a battlefield, and Emily Carter was ready to fight. The sky was a crucible, its blue expanse now a churning arena of sound and fury. Emily Carter's F-16 tore through the air, its engines a primal roar as she dove toward Major James Holt's crippled jet. The altimeter spun downward. 12,000 feet, 10,000, 8,000. The desert floor rushing closer, a merciless canvas of sand and stone. Her cockpit was alive with warnings, proximity alerts, G-force limits, the drone's simulated lock-on still flashing red. She ignored them all, her focus locked on Holt's F-16, its silhouette wobbling against the horizon, trailing a thin, deadly stream of fuel vapor. Her breath was steady, her hands unshaking, but her heart pounded a rhythm of urgency. This was no longer a drill. This was survival. "Eagle 3 status," Emily said into the comms, her voice a blade cutting through the chaos. Static hissed, then Holt's response, ragged and tight. "Losing thrust. Controls sluggish." "I am at 6,000 and dropping fast." His jet was in a death spiral, its nose pitching downward, wings shuddering under the strain. The tower's voice broke in, sharp and desperate. "Eagle 3, prepare to eject." Echo 5, disengage immediately. That is a direct order. General Richard Hayes' command carried the weight of decades, but Emily's mind was elsewhere, calculating angles, speeds, and the physics of a maneuver no manual had ever taught. She glanced at her radar. The rogue drone was still circling, its AI relentless, now targeting the scattered formation above. The other pilots were regrouping, their voices a tangle of shouted coordinates and curses, but they were too far to help. Holt's trajectory was a problem not just for him, but for the entire squad. If he crashed outside the safe zone, the wreckage could scatter into the civilian perimeter, a disaster that would haunt the base for years. If he ejected now, the jet would plummet unchecked. Emily's jaw tightened. She had seconds to act, and protocol was not going to save him. "Echo 5, initiating vector tether," she said, her tone flat, almost mechanical, as if naming a maneuver that existed only in her mind. The tower erupted. "Vector what?" a controller snapped. "There is no such protocol." Hayes's voice followed, laced with fury. "Carter, you are risking 2 jets and a court-martial. Get back in formation." She flicked off the comms, the silence in her cockpit sudden and absolute. The world narrowed to her jet, Holtz, and the shrinking gap between them. Her father's words surfaced, unbidden, from a night in the New Mexico desert. "When the sky turns against you, Emily, you do not follow rules. You make them." She pushed her throttle forward, her F-16 accelerating into a dive so steep her vision blurred at the edges, the G-forces crushing her chest, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The desert loomed, a vast, unforgiving witness. Holt's jet was less than 100 feet below, its wings rocking violently, its tail spewing vapor like blood in water. She aligned her jet parallel to his, closing the distance to 30 feet, a suicidal proximity where wake turbulence could shred her controls. Her sensors screamed, red lights flashing across her dashboard, but she held steady, her hands moving with a precision that felt almost otherworldly. In the tower, the air was thick with tension. Technicians stared at screens, their faces pale, data streams painting a picture of madness. Colonel David Brooks gripped the edge of a console, his knuckles white. "She is going to kill them both," he muttered, his voice barely audible. General Hayes stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the live feed from an aerial drone, where Emily's jet was a silver streak chasing Holtz. "What in God's name is she doing?" a junior officer whispered. No one answered. The room was a held breath, every second stretching into eternity. Emily's cockpit was a storm of sound and vibration, the jet protesting as she pushed it beyond its limits. She adjusted her angle, tilting her wings to catch Holt's slipstream, using her jet's air pressure to nudge his trajectory. The physics were absurd, a gamble born of instinct and desperation. Her father had once shown her how to use wake turbulence to stabilize a stalled trainer plane, a trick he had learned in combat, never logged, never taught. She was betting Holt's life on it now. "Come on," she whispered, her voice lost in the roar. "Hold together." Holt's jet responded, its descent slowing, its nose lifting slightly as Emily's jet forced it into a shallower arc. The distance between them was now 20 feet, close enough that she could see the scratches on his canopy. The faint outline of his helmet slumped forward. "Holt, talk to me," she said, flicking the comms back on. A groan answered, then his voice, weak but alive. "Carter, what the hell are you doing?" She did not answer. There was no time. Her arms burned from the strain, her jet shuddering as it fought the turbulence. She was not just flying now, she was wrestling the sky itself. Above, the formation was in disarray, the drone still weaving through the squad, its mock missiles forcing evasive maneuvers. Captain Ellis's voice cut through the comms, sharp with panic. "Eagle 1 to tower, we are losing cohesion." "Where is Echo 5? The controller's response was clipped. "Echo 5 is off-grid, assisting Eagle 3. Emergency response scrambled." A refueling bird was en route, but it was minutes away, and Holt had seconds. Emily's screen showed the civilian perimeter approaching, a red line on her map that marked the point of no return. She pushed harder, her jet's engines screaming, her vision tunneling as the G-forces clawed at her consciousness. In the tower, a technician shouted, "She is stabilizing him!" The live feed showed Emily's jet locked in a deadly dance with Holt's, their wings nearly kissing, their paths converging into a single, impossible line. Brooks shook his head, his voice a mix of disbelief and awe. "No one can fly like that." Hayes said nothing, his face unreadable, but his eyes never left the screen. The room was silent now, the only sound the hum of electronics and the faint crackle of the comms. Emily's world was the cockpit, the stick, and the fading silhouette of Holt's jet. Her arms trembled, her breath ragged, but she held the line, her jet's pressure forcing Holtz into a controlled glide. The altimeter stabilized at 3,000 feet, the desert no longer a death sentence but a landing strip. "Holt, stay with me," she said, her voice steady despite the fire in her lungs. "Refueling bird is inbound. You are going to make it." His response was a faint grunt, but it was enough. He was alive, and that was all that mattered. The refueling bird appeared on her radar, a lumbering savior cutting through the sky. "Echo 5, this is Angel 1, the pilot's voice crackled. "We have visual. Hold position for 30 seconds. Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. 30 seconds was an eternity, but she nodded to herself, her hands locked on the controls. The desert blurred below, the civilian perimeter a distant threat now. She was not just saving Holt, she was saving them all. As the refueling bird closed in, Emily's jet shook violently, a final protest from the turbulence. She held her course, her vision swimming, her body screaming for relief. The sky was no longer blue, it was a battlefield, and she was its last warrior. The refueling bird's hose connected, pumping just enough fuel to keep Holt's jet aloft. "Eagle 3, you are clear," the pilot said. Holt's jet leveled out, its descent arrested, its path now a slow climb back to base. Emily exhaled, her shoulders sagging, the world snapping back into focus. "Echo 5, return to base," the tower ordered, the voice subdued, almost reverent. Emily flicked her comms on, her voice hoarse but calm. "Copy." She pulled her jet into a gentle climb, the desert falling away, the sky opening before her. Holt's jet limped ahead, the refueling bird at its side. The drone was gone, disengaged by the tower, the formation regrouping in the distance. She had done the impossible, but the fight was not over. The tower was waiting, and so was judgment. The sky over Nellis Air Force Base had turned golden, the late morning sun casting long shadows across the desert as Emily Carter's F-16 climbed back toward the formation. Her cockpit was a furnace of adrenaline and exhaustion, the air thick with the metallic tang of sweat and the faint hum of her jet systems. Her hands, still gripping the stick, trembled faintly, not from fear, but from the strain of holding Major James Holt's jet in a lifeline forged of air and instinct. The vector tether, a maneuver born from her father's unorthodox lessons, had worked. Holt's jet was limping toward the runway, stabilized by the refueling bird, but Emily's fight was far from over. The tower's silence on the comms was a storm waiting to break. She leveled her jet at 10,000 feet, the horizon steadying as her breathing slowed. The desert below was a vast, unforgiving witness to what she had just done. A maneuver no pilot had attempted, no manual had recorded. Her screens still flickered with residual warnings, the proximity alerts a fading echo of the 30 feet that had separated her from Holt's spiraling F-16. She glanced at her radar. The formation was regrouping, the rogue drone disengaged, its AI no longer a threat. The other pilots' voices crackled through the comms, subdued, laced with something she could not quite name. Awe, perhaps. Or disbelief. "Eagle 1 to Echo 5, Captain Ellis said, his tone clipped but softer than before. "Status report." Emily's voice was hoarse, her throat raw from the G-forces that had crushed her chest. "Echo 5 operational, returning to base." There was a pause, then Ellis again, quieter. "Copy." "Good work, Carter." It was not praise, not exactly, but it was the first time anyone in the formation had used her name. She did not respond. There was no time for sentiment. The runway was approaching, and with it, the reckoning. In the tower, the atmosphere was electric, a mix of shock and scrutiny. General Richard Hayes stood like a statue, his gray eyes locked on the live feed as Emily's jet descended. Colonel David Brooks paced, his jaw tight, muttering to a technician. "Pull the telemetry. Every second of that maneuver." "I want it dissected." The screens showed multiple angles. an aerial drone capturing Emily's jet aligning with Holt's, their wings nearly touching. A cockpit feed showing her hands steady, her face a mask of focus. The room was no longer silent. Whispers rippled among the officers, words like impossible and reckless, mingling with grudging respect. Emily's jet touched down last, the screech of tires on the runway a sharp punctuation to the morning's chaos. She taxied to the hangar, her movements methodical, her mind already bracing for what came next. The cockpit canopy hissed open, and the desert heat rushed in, carrying the scent of scorched asphalt and jet fuel. She unbuckled her harness, removed her helmet, and stepped onto the ladder. Her blonde hair, damp with sweat, clung to her neck. Her flight suit was streaked with dust, a scuff mark on one shoulder from the strain of her dive. She stood on the tarmac, helmet under her arm, and felt the weight of every eye in the hangar. The space was unnaturally still. Mechanics paused, tools in hand. Pilots from the formation lingered near their jets, their faces unreadable. Holt's F-16 was already in the bay, its nose scorched, its fuel system under inspection. He was alive, standing shakily beside a medic, his eyes finding Emily's across the hangar. He nodded once, a gesture heavy with something unspoken. Gratitude, perhaps, or shame. She returned the nod, then turned away, her boots clicking against the concrete as she walked toward the ready room. The crowd parted, their silence louder than any applause. Inside the tower, Hayes turned to Brooks, his voice low. She disobeyed 2 direct orders, violated 5 protocols. Brooks nodded, his expression conflicted, and saved a pilot, a jet, and the civilian perimeter. That maneuver, vector tether, she called it, it is not in any playbook. Hayes's eyes narrowed. Then we find out where it came from, and who the hell she really is. A junior officer approached, holding a tablet. Sir, the telemetry is unprecedented. Her jet sustained 9 Gs, sustained wake turbulence at 20 feet. No one should have walked away from that. Hayes said nothing, but his silence was a command in itself. Emily reached the ready room, her steps slowing as she passed the briefing table where the morning's mockery had begun. The room was empty now, the air heavy with the ghost of laughter. She set her helmet down, her fingers lingering on its scratched surface, and allowed herself a single, shuddering breath. Her body ached, her arms heavy from the strain, but her mind was sharp, replaying every second of the maneuver. The vector tether had been a gamble, a dance with physics she had only half understood. Her father's voice echoed again. The sky does not care who you are, Emily, but it listens if you speak its language. She had spoken, and the sky had answered. But the base was another matter. She straightened, wiping sweat from her brow, and headed for the debriefing room. The corridor was lined with officers, their conversations halting as she passed. Some stared, others averted their eyes, but none spoke. She was no longer just Colonel Thomas Carter's daughter, no longer just Echo 5. She was something else now, something they could not name. The debriefing room was colder than the hangar, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the long table. Emily entered, her uniform still damp, her posture unyielding. Every head turned, pilots, commanders, technicians, all seated in rigid rows. At the front, Colonel Brooks stood beside a screen, its display frozen on a frame of her jet paralleling Holt's, meters apart. General Hayes sat at the table's head, his face a mask of stone. Emily took her seat at the far end alone, her hands folded, her eyes meeting no one's. Brooks cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the tension. We have reviewed the footage. He clicked a remote and the screen came alive, showing Emily's jet peeling from formation, diving with a precision that seemed almost inhuman. Murmurs stirred, but Brooks raised a hand. Echo 5 disobeyed 2 direct flight commands, violated 5 maneuvering protocols. The room bristled, some officers nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. Emily's expression did not change, but her pulse quickened. She knew what came next. Brooks continued, his tone shifting, almost reluctant. In doing so, she prevented a fatal crash, saved a fully armed F-16, preserved the civilian perimeter. He paused, his eyes flicking to Emily, then away. She executed a maneuver, vector tether, that no one in this room could replicate. The screen looped the footage, her jet's wings steady, Holtz stabilizing under her pressure. A senior officer at the table leaned forward, his voice sharp. She should be court-martialed for insubordination. Brooks hesitated, then shook his head. No. The door opened and a hush fell. General Nathan Reed stepped into the room, his presence a seismic shift. He was a legend, commander of the 9th Air Combat Wing, a man who had not attended a debrief in years. His civilian jacket and worn jeans belied the authority in his stride. Every officer stiffened, even Hayes, whose arms dropped to his sides. Reed walked past the screen, his eyes scanning the footage, then stopped beside Emily's chair. The silence was absolute, heavy with anticipation. He looked at her, not down but eye to eye, his gaze piercing yet warm. Without a word, he raised his hand and placed it over his heart, a slow, deliberate gesture. Then he bowed his head, not a salute, but something deeper, older, a warrior's respect. Emily's throat tightened, her eyes glistening, but she held his gaze, unmoving. Reed turned to the room, his voice low, resonant. If any of you still question who the real pilot is in this room, you are not qualified to sit here. He walked out, leaving a silence that roared louder than any jet. Emily exhaled, her hands unclenching. The room was still, the officers' faces a mix of awe and unease. Brooks cleared his throat, resuming the debrief, but the momentum had shifted. The vector tether was no longer a violation. It was a miracle, and Emily Carter was its architect. She stood, her chair scraping softly, and walked out, the weight of their stares following her. The sky had tested her, and she had answered. Now the base would have to do the same. The air in the corridor outside the debriefing room was heavy, thick with the scent of polished concrete and lingering jet fuel. Emily Carter walked alone, her boots echoing in the dim passage, each step a deliberate act of defiance against the weight of what had just transpired. Her flight suit clung to her skin, damp with sweat, the scuff on her shoulder a badge of the morning's battle. Her blonde hair, freed from its tight bun, hung in loose strands against her neck, and her hazel eyes burned with a quiet fire. General Nathan Reed's gesture, his hand over his heart, his bow, had shifted something in the room, in her, but the fight was not over. The base was a crucible, and she was still being forged. She passed a window overlooking the tarmac, where the F-16s stood silent, their sleek forms catching the midday sun. Major James Holt's jet was cordoned off, mechanics swarming its fuel system, their tools glinting like surgical instruments. Holt himself was nowhere in sight, likely still with the medics, his nod in the hangar a memory that lingered in Emily's mind. She had saved him, risked everything to pull him from the jaws of the desert, but she knew better than to expect gratitude. Not yet. The base was a place of pride, and pride bent slowly, if at all. The door to the operations lounge loomed ahead, its frosted glass etched with the Air Force insignia. Emily paused, her hand on the handle, and took a breath. Inside, she would face the aftermath, not just of her maneuver, but of her existence here, as Colonel Thomas Carter's daughter, as Echo 5, as the woman who had dared to rewrite the sky. She pushed the door open, and the room fell silent. Officers lined the walls, their uniforms crisp, their faces a gallery of guarded expressions. Colonel David Brooks stood at the front, a tablet in hand, its screen glowing with telemetry data from her flight. General Richard Hayes sat at the head of a long table, his gray eyes fixed on her, unreadable but sharp. The other pilots from the drill, Captain Ellis, Lieutenant Pierce, and the rest sat in clusters, their postures tense, their eyes flicking between Emily and the screen. She took her place at the far end, standing rather than sitting, her helmet tucked under her arm like a shield. Brooks cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the stillness. "We have analyzed the flight data." He tapped the tablet, and the screen behind him flared to life, showing a 3D rendering of Emily's jet diving toward Holtz, their paths a pair of silver threads weaving impossibly close. Echo 5 executed an unclassified maneuver, vector tether, at 3,000 feet, under 9 Gs, within 20 feet of Eagle 3's wake turbulence. The room stirred, murmurs rising like a tide. Brooks raised a hand, silencing them. The maneuver stabilized Major Holt's descent, allowing the refueling bird to intervene. Outcome: 1 pilot saved, 1 aircraft preserved, civilian perimeter protected. He paused, his eyes meeting Emily's for the first time, a flicker of something, respect, perhaps, or unease, crossing his face. "However," he continued, "Echo 5 violated 2 direct orders and 5 maneuvering protocols. Her actions were unauthorized, undocumented, and, by all accounts, reckless." The murmurs grew louder, some officers nodding, others shaking their heads. Hayes leaned forward, his voice low but piercing. "Explain yourself, Carter. Where did this vector tether come from?" "And why should we not ground you for insubordination?" Emily's pulse quickened, but her face remained a mask of calm. She set her helmet on the table, its scratched surface catching the light, and straightened. "Sir," she said, her voice steady, resonant, "the vector tether was not in any manual because it was taught to me by Colonel Thomas Carter. In classified no-fly zones off the books, he showed me how to use wake turbulence to stabilize a failing aircraft. It was a combat trick, never logged, never shared." The room went still, the weight of her father's name a thunderclap. "As for the orders, I calculated the risk. Major Holt's trajectory threatened the civilian perimeter. Ejection was not an option. I acted to save him, the jet, and the mission." Hayes's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, his silence a challenge. Brooks shifted, his tablet forgotten. "You expect us to believe you improvised a maneuver no one has ever seen based on... what? Your father's word?" Emily's jaw tightened, but her voice did not waver. "I expect you to believe the telemetry, sir. The data does not lie." A ripple of tension passed through the room, officers exchanging glances, some leaning forward, others sitting back. The screen looped the footage, her jet's precision a silent rebuttal to their doubts. A senior officer, Major Callahan, spoke from the back, his voice sharp. "She should face a court-martial. Orders exist for a reason. If every pilot acted on instinct, we would have chaos." His words hung heavy, echoed by a few nods. Emily's hands clenched at her sides, but before she could respond, a new voice cut through, low and commanding. "No." Every head turned. General Nathan Reed stood in the doorway, his civilian jacket a stark contrast to the sea of uniforms. His presence was a force, his gray hair and weathered face carrying the weight of decades in the sky. He stepped forward, his boots soft against the floor, and stopped beside the screen. The footage paused, Emily's jet frozen mid-dive, a silver spear against the desert. Reed's eyes scanned the room, lingering on Hayes, then Brooks, before settling on Emily. "Court-martial a pilot who saved a life and a mission?" he said, his voice quiet but unyielding. "You would ground the best instinct in this room." The silence was absolute, the officers frozen, their breaths held. Reed turned to the screen, pointing at the frozen frame. "This is not recklessness, is not. This is genius. Carter did not just fly. She rewrote the rules of engagement in real time." He looked at Emily, his gaze piercing but warm, and placed his hand over his heart again, a gesture that needed no explanation. "If you cannot see that, you are not fit to judge her." He walked out, his shadow lingering in the doorway, and the room exhaled. Hayes leaned back, his face unreadable but his authority shaken. Brooks set the tablet down, his voice subdued. "The maneuver is under classification review. Major Holt is grounded pending inspection. Echo 5's actions are logged as emergency deviation." He hesitated, then added, "Outcome, lives saved." The officers stirred, some whispering, others staring at Emily with new eyes. She stood motionless, her chest tight, her mind replaying Reed's words. Genius. Not a word she had sought, but one she would carry. Brooks dismissed the room and the officers filed out, their murmurs trailing like smoke. Emily remained, her eyes on the screen, where her jet still hung in the air, defying gravity, defying doubt. Hayes approached, his steps deliberate, and stopped beside her. "You are not off the hook, Carter," he said, his voice low. "Genius or not, you broke chain of command. Prove it was not a fluke." He walked away, leaving her alone with the hum of the screen and the weight of his challenge. She picked up her helmet, her fingers tracing its scratches, and walked out. The corridor was empty now, the base settling into the rhythm of midday. But something had shifted. The air felt different, charged with the echo of her name. She was no longer just Echo 5. She was Emily Carter, the pilot who had faced the sky and won. But the base was watching, waiting for her next move, and she knew the hardest battles were still ahead. The tarmac at Nellis Air Force Base shimmered under the Nevada sun, its heat rising in waves that blurred the edges of the F-16s lined in precise rows. Emily Carter walked across the concrete, her boots striking a steady rhythm, her flight suit still marked with the dust and sweat of the morning's trial. Her blonde hair, loosened from its bun, caught the breeze, strands dancing against her neck. Her helmet hung at her side, its scratched surface a silent testament to the vector tether maneuver that had reshaped the base's perception of her. The air was warm, heavy with the tang of jet fuel and the faint hum of distant engines, but the base was quieter than usual, as if holding its breath. Emily's steps were deliberate, her hazel eyes fixed ahead, but she felt the shift in the atmosphere. The hangar loomed to her left, its vast doors open, mechanics pausing mid-task to watch her pass. A technician set down his wrench, its clatter echoing in the stillness. Two officers near a refueling truck stopped their conversation, their gazes following her, not with skepticism, but with something new. Curiosity, perhaps, or respect. A junior pilot, coffee cup in hand, lowered it slowly, his eyes wide. Emily did not meet their stares. She did not need to. The weight of their attention was enough. She had expected scrutiny after the debriefing, perhaps even hostility. General Richard Hayes's parting words, "Prove it was not a fluke," still rang in her ears, a challenge that promised more battles. But this was different. As she crossed the halfway mark of the tarmac, the figures around her began to align, forming a corridor of bodies. Ground crew, instructors, pilots, standing still facing her. No one spoke, but their silence was a language of its own, heavy with acknowledgement. Emily's chest tightened, not from fear, but from the sudden realization that she was no longer invisible. The sky above cracked with a sonic rumble, sharp and deliberate. Emily's gaze flicked upward, unflinching, as a single F-16 swept low over the runway, its afterburners igniting a trail of fire against the golden haze. It climbed sharply, a clean vertical ascent that pierced the clouds before banking into the sun. It was no stunt, no salute, just Major James Holt, his jet a silver arrow slicing the sky. She stopped walking, tracking its arc, her lips pressing into a thin line. Holt, the man she had pulled from a death spiral, was speaking in the only way he knew how. "We saw you," his flyover said. "We know." She resumed her steps, the corridor of figures tightening around her. A sergeant raised his hand to his brow, a crisp salute, not for rank but for something deeper. A captain followed, then 2 more, then 10, uniformed men and women in flight suits and fatigues, their hands rising in unison. Emily's throat tightened, her breath catching, but she kept her eyes forward, her posture unyielding. She did not know most of them. They had not trained together, not flown together, but today they had witnessed something unforgettable. They were saluting the pilot who had defied the sky and won. At the far end of the tarmac, a lone figure emerged from the shadows of Hangar 6. General Nathan Reed, in his olive-green civilian jacket and worn jeans, stood apart from the uniformed ranks. No medals adorned his chest, no escort flanked him, just the quiet authority of a man who had seen wars and written their outcomes. He walked toward her, his steps measured, his gray eyes locked on hers. The corridor parted, the salutes continuing, a ripple of respect that followed her like a tide. Reed stopped directly in front of her, his presence a wall against the world. He did not smile, did not blink. His voice was low, clear, cutting through the hum of the bass. "You did not just land that jet, Carter. You landed every doubt we ever had." Emily's breath hitched, her eyes glistening, but she held his gaze, her silence a mirror of his own. Reed placed a hand on her shoulder, brief but firm, then stepped aside, letting her pass. The gesture was not ceremonial. It was human, a recognition that needed no words. She walked on, through the sea of silence, through the line of salutes, through the weight of a history shifting on its axis. The ready rooms passed in a blur, their walls lined with mission briefs and faded photographs. The old locker room, still covered in stickers from 1,000 untold stories, loomed to her right. She did not stop. Her destination was the pilot's lounge, a quiet sanctuary where the base's pulse slowed, where pilots came to breathe between battles. She pushed the door open, and the room was empty, its fluorescent lights casting a soft glow over worn leather benches and a coffee machine humming in the corner. Emily sat, her helmet resting on her lap, and exhaled. The faint echo of an F-16 taxiing on the runway drifted through the walls, a reminder of the world she had just reshaped. Across from her, on the far wall, hung the engraved plaques, one for every pilot who had led missions under fire, saved crews from certain death, or flown through storms no one thought survivable. Most names were faded, their stories softened by time, but one stood out, brand new, its surface gleaming in the light: Emily R. Carter. She leaned back, her fingers tracing the edge of her helmet, and let the silence settle. For the first time in years, she felt no pressure, no need to outfly, outfight, or outperform anyone. The mission was over, and her name was no longer just a call sign on a manifest. It was on the wall, etched in metal, a mark that would outlast her. But more than that, it was in the eyes of the base, in the salutes, in Holt's flyover, in Reed's words. She had not just proven herself, she had changed them. Outside, the base resumed its rhythm, mechanics returning to their tools, officers to their briefings, jets to their maintenance checks. But the corridor of respect had left its mark, a ripple that would spread through the lounges, the barracks, the command rooms. Emily closed her eyes, the hum of the lounge wrapping around her like a second skin. She was still Colonel Thomas Carter's daughter, still Echo 5, but she was also something more, the pilot who had flown through a storm of doubt and emerged as a legend. The door creaked open, and Emily's eyes flicked up, expecting an officer or a stray mechanic. Instead, it was Reed, his jacket slung over one shoulder, his expression unreadable. He did not sit, did not speak, just leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "The vector tether is being classified as protocol," he said finally, his voice soft but firm. "Your name is attached to it." "First of its kind." Emily nodded, her throat too tight for words. Reed's gaze lingered, then he turned to leave, pausing at the threshold. "Keep flying, Carter. The sky is not done with you." He was gone before she could respond, the door swinging shut behind him. Emily looked back at the plaque, her name a beacon in the dim light, and felt a quiet resolve settle in her chest. The base had seen her, truly seen her, but this was not the end. It was a beginning. The sky was waiting, and she would answer its call. The pilot's lounge at Nellis Air Force Base was a sanctuary of quiet, its worn leather benches and scuffed tables a stark contrast to the gleaming precision of the tarmac outside. Emily Carter sat alone, her helmet resting on the bench beside her, its scratched surface catching the flicker of fluorescent lights. The air was cool, tinged with the faint bitterness of old coffee and the hum of a distant air conditioner. Outside, the base pulsed with life. Jets taxiing, mechanics shouting, the low growl of engines warming up. But here, in this small room, time seemed to pause, granting her a moment to breathe. Her blonde hair hung loose, framing her face, and her hazel eyes, usually sharp with focus, softened as they traced the wall across from her. The engraved plaques hung in a solemn row, each one a story of courage carved in metal. Names faded by time told of pilots who had faced fire, defied odds, or flown through storms that should have claimed them. Emily's gaze settled on the newest edition, its surface still gleaming, untouched by the years. Emily R. Carter. Her name, etched beside the words Vector Tether Protocol, was a mark of permanence in a world of fleeting victories. She exhaled slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of her flight suit, the dust and scuff marks a reminder of the morning's battle. For the first time in years, she felt no weight, no need to prove herself, no shadow of her father's legacy pressing against her spine. The lounge was empty, but the echoes of the day lingered. General Nathan Reed's words, "The sky is not done with you," rang in her mind, a quiet prophecy she was not yet ready to unravel. The corridor of salutes, Major James Holt's flyover, the grudging awe in Colonel David Brooks's voice, all of it had shifted something in her, not just in how the base saw her, but in how she saw herself. She was no longer just Colonel Thomas Carter's daughter, no longer just Echo 5. She was Emily, the pilot who had rewritten the sky, who had turned doubt into a plaque on the wall. She leaned back, her shoulders relaxing against the bench, and let her mind drift. A memory surfaced, vivid and sharp, from a New Mexico night when she was 17. The desert stretched endless beneath a sky ablaze with stars, and her father had sat beside her in the cockpit of a battered T-38, his hands steady, his voice calm. "The sky is a mirror, Emily," he had said, guiding her through a low pass over a canyon. "It shows you who you are, but only if you are brave enough to look." She had been terrified then, her hands trembling on the controls, but his belief in her had been a tether stronger than any maneuver. Now, years later, she understood. The sky had shown her strength, her instinct, her truth. The door creaked open, pulling her back to the present. She glanced up, expecting Reed or perhaps Holt, but it was Captain Ellis, the lead pilot from the drill. His flight suit was unzipped at the collar, his dark hair disheveled, and his expression was one she had not seen before, open, almost vulnerable. He hesitated at the threshold, then stepped inside, letting the door swing shut. "Carter," he said, his voice low. "Mind if I sit?" Emily nodded, gesturing to the bench across from her. He sat, resting his elbows on his knees, his eyes flicking to the plaque on the wall. "I watched the footage again," Ellis said, his tone careful, as if choosing each word. "What you did out there. I have flown combat missions, seen aces pull miracles, but that vector tether?" He shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "That was something else. You saved Holt, saved us all from a mess we could not have cleaned up." Emily's lips parted, but she said nothing. her throat tight. Praise was unfamiliar, a weight she was not sure how to carry. Ellis leaned back, his gaze steady. I was one of them, you know. The ones who thought you did not belong, too young to everything. I was wrong. He paused, his eyes searching hers. You are not just a pilot, Carter. You are the kind we write stories about. He stood, offering a nod, and walked out, leaving the room quieter than before. Emily stared at the door, her chest aching with a warmth she had not expected. The base was not just seeing her now, it was beginning to understand. She rose, picking up her helmet, and crossed to the wall. Her fingers traced the edges of her plaque, the metal cool against her skin. The words Vector Tether Protocol were a bridge between her father's lessons and her own legacy, a proof that she had not just followed his path, but carved her own. She thought of Holt, alive because of her, of Reed, whose respect had silenced a room, of General Richard Hayes, whose challenge, prove it was not a fluke, was a fire she would carry into the next mission. The sky was not done with her, and she was not done with it. Outside, the sun was dipping toward the horizon, painting the tarmac in shades of amber and gold. Emily stepped onto the concrete, the breeze carrying the faint roar of a jet climbing into the dusk. The base was alive again, its rhythm unbroken, but she felt its pulse differently now. Mechanics glanced her way, their nods subtle but real. A group of junior pilots near the hangar paused, one raising a hand in a half-wave. She returned it, her lips curving into a faint smile, and kept walking. The memory of the corridor of salutes lingered, a moment she would carry forever. It was not about the gestures themselves, but what they meant. A recognition that she had flown through a storm of doubt and emerged not just victorious, but transformative. She was the last pilot, not in sequence but in essence, the one who had dared to break the rules and make them anew. Her father had taught her to listen to the sky, but today she had taught the base to listen to her. She stopped at the edge of the tarmac, her eyes lifting to the horizon where the last jet vanished into the clouds. The sky was vast, endless, a canvas of possibility that called to her still. She adjusted her helmet under her arm, its weight familiar, grounding. The next mission would come, with its own challenges, its own skeptics, but she was ready. The plaque in the lounge was not an end, but a beginning, a promise that her name would echo through the base, through the sky, for years to come. Emily turned back toward the hangar, her steps light, her heart steady. The base was no longer a gauntlet, but a home, its people no longer judges, but witnesses to her rise. She was Emily Carter, the last pilot, and the sky was hers to command. The commander mocked her salute. Minutes later, she took down the enemy leader solo,